So, right. Thanks everybody for coming to this meeting of Subject Overview and Scrutiny Committee 1, which, due to government advice to the public to practice social distancing, will be held virtually with committee members and officers accessing the meeting from remote locations. The meeting is being recorded and will be available via the Council's website to be viewed subsequently. Please can everyone ensure that all mobile phones are switched off or on silent mode. Members will have received an electronic copy of the agenda on Tuesday the 1st of December. For the record, the agenda can also be viewed on the Council's website. Members and officers will be speaking at various points during the meeting, and those speaking switch their cameras on at that point. But I would ask that, with the exception of myself, chairperson, all other times you keep your cameras and microphones switched off, as this will help minimise background noise and interference and to ensure your connection remains as stable as possible. Please do not use your microphone until I invite you to do so. Officers from Scrutiny will be supporting me throughout the meeting and monitoring the use of microphones as well where necessary, and will mute those not being used. If any members or officers wish to raise a point or question, they should type in the instant messaging icon on the bottom left of the Skype window to type "speak," and I will come to you in the order I receive requests. Please do not use the instant messaging chat to enter questions or comments. I'll now ask the Scrutiny Officer to announce the names of councillors in attendance at this meeting. Officers are asked to introduce themselves when I invite them to speak, and they should also ensure microphones and cameras are switched off when not in use. So can I ask the Scrutiny Officer to announce the members in attendance?
Yeah, hi, it's Tracy. Just to announce that we have in attendance this morning Councillor Stuart Baldwin, Councillor Tom Beadle, Councillor John Paul Blundell, Councillor Richard Collins, Councillor Tom Gifford, Councillor Jane Gebby, Councillor Kay Rowlands, Councillor Bridie Sedgebeer, Councillor Ross Derman, Councillor Alex Williams, Councillor Amanda Williams, and Councillor Charles Smith.
Thanks, Tracy. Have we had any apologies then, item 1, for absence?
Not aware of any apologies, Chair, at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Item 2.
Excuse me, Chair. Excuse me,
Yeah.
Chair. I'm really sorry. I'm on my phone because my laptop is saying that I do not have a desktop in my name. So I can't get online via my laptop. I'm really sorry. So I've got no chat facility because I'm on my phone, obviously. All right. So I do beg your pardon.
No, understood.
That's the same problem I had this morning, and I rebooted a few times and eventually let me in.
Councillor Smith.
Good morning. Just to let you know, Chair, that I will need to leave at 12 o'clock. I've got a meeting with Central South Committee officers for 12 on the dot.
Okay, no problem. So item 2 then is declarations of interest. Can you just type "speak" into the chat if you have any declarations, and I'll come to you in turn. Nope, didn't think so. Okay, item 3 then are approval of the minutes held of the meeting held, on the 19th of October 2020. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please, for those minutes?
Yeah. I'll move them, Chair.
I'll second, Chair.
You got that, Tracy?
Yes, Chair.
Brilliant. Okay, brilliant. Item 4 then is the verbal update from the Corporate Director for Education and Family Support. Can I ask him to present his verbal update, after which I'll call on members to speak in the instant messaging chat in the order that they indicate. So, Lynsey, over to you.
Thanks. Sorry.
Sorry, Chair. Did someone want to come in first?
Stuart, was that you?
It was Tom. Thank you very much. Sorry, Chair. It was just that I couldn't see Lynsey, and I knew he'd had trouble, so I was just going to say I didn't think he was in. But he's back, so I shouldn't have been so quick.
No worries. Lynsey, over to you.
Thanks, Councillor Baldwin. Thanks, Chair. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I'm having a bit of difficulty, like Councillor Williams this morning, logging on. So what I'd like to do, I'd like to run through the presentation with you this morning. Nick, can I ask you to pop the presentation up and share it for the screen? While Nick's doing that, for the purpose of the recording, I'm Lynsey Harvey. I'm the Corporate Director of Education and Family Support. So we've pulled together a small presentation to accompany our verbal update this morning. Hopefully Nick can pop it up for us, and then we'll run through it. So if that's okay, Chair, if you just give us a minute to pop it up.
You may be overestimating my IT skills here, Lyns. You taught me through... okay, I'm trying to figure it out now. I'm assuming it's the little button on the far right with 3 dots. Is that how we go to?
It should be the one down the bottom, Nick, with a TV screen with an arrow pointing northeast.
Okay. I think I know how to do it. Bear with me, sorry.
Sorry, Nick. Sorry, Chair.
It's all right, no worries.
I can see Rachel and Rachel's online at the moment, Chair. Do you want me to send it to a scrutiny officer? We can get it up their end as well.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Probably sensible. No problem. If IT issues happen, it's always 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. So.
You're not wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rachel, I've sent that to you now. If you could just share it when it comes to you, that would be great.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, Lynsey, did you want to come in? Not
Yeah.
Lynsey Harvey, Lynsey Morris, sorry.
Yeah. Just to say that I need to leave by 11:15 as well because I'm teaching at 11, so I need to be back in school.
No problem.
Do you have it there, Rachel?
I have indeed. I'm trying to minimize my Skype screen and then I'll maximize the presentation.
Great, thanks.
Is that working?
Have we started presenting there, Rich?
Okay. Okay. Is that working?
Yeah, looking good. So it's coming. Something's coming through now.
Yeah.
1 second.
Okay. I always forget the present screen button.
There you go.
Oh.
It was, but it's gone.
Okay. Oh, okay. Try again. Is the presentation on the screen now?
That's great. Thanks, Rich.
Yeah,
and
okay.
if I could ask you just to page down when I turn to the next slide, that'd be great.
That's fine.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. Apologies, Chair. Apologies, members. So I'll just run you through this. Today, I think it'd be helpful just to give you an update on where we are and some of the issues that we've encountered and are still encountering over the last couple of months and the impact they've had on some education and family support services in Bridgend. So page down, please, Rich. Okay, thanks. So a couple of things I want to talk through today, if it's okay. First of all, just give you some background and context to the situation. I'm then going to give you an update on the childcare hubs and some of the successes and challenges we faced with blended learning. Then I'm going to move on to some of the work we've done, certainly since July, on working with schools to make sure school settings are COVID safe. I'm going to wrap up the presentation with some of the main challenges that we're facing, emerging and what we see coming in the future. And then if it's okay, Chair, we'll open it up for a Q&A session at the end. Okay, so page down, please, Rich. Okay, so just to recap what happened in March, we had a ministerial announcement back on the 18th of March to close all our schools. And as myself and Nick were reflecting on last week, there was a fairly frenetic weekend, that weekend, to try and open up all the childcare hubs, which we did. And we mobilised, as you can see on the slide there, over 4,000 staff to provide support for over 20,000 learners in the space of 72 hours. So very, very challenging. And again, it was new to Wales, it was pretty much new to the world. And to set some of these settings up, we had to make sure that we were obviously adhering to rapidly emerging health and safety requirements. We needed to make sure that our learners were eligible for free school meals and those attending schools were fed. And obviously we made sure to help the economy that childcare facilities were in place for a number of key workers. So again, we're very proud of that first week. It was very challenging, but it certainly set a very strong foundation for the couple of months that came ahead. Okay, just press page down, please, Reg. Okay, keep going. Okay, so it just gives you an update there on what we achieved in that first. Can you go up, please, Reg?
Sorry, yeah. I think there's a little delay, isn't there? There we are.
Okay, thanks. So as you can see there, it was a mammoth job right at the start for Bridgend. What we managed to put in place was a 10-hour-a-day provision across 7 days a week that started on the 23rd of March and went through to mid-June. And during that period, we supported, well, almost 1,000 children in a number of hubs and in our 5 fly and start settings. So again, we're very proud of what we achieved there. Lots of work with schools, lots of work with other agencies, lots of work with our childcare providers to put this provision in place. So very pleasing, but a very busy and challenging time for all concerned. Next slide, please, Reg. Now, as the screen is coming up, one of the challenges we had very early on is making sure that we supported staff with this. It was difficult because obviously this was new for staff as well, and we wanted to make sure that they were benefiting from professional support. So very early on, we identified a number of groups to support them. From a staff wellbeing group, we looked at a supporting vulnerable learner group and a remote teaching and learning group, and these still continue to this day, and they still continue to disseminate good practice to staff. Now, in addition to that, we've made sure that all staff benefit from specialist HR, health and safety, and strategic support from the senior leadership team. Now, we've had several compliments from schools on this, so we're very, very pleased that this has continued. We've also held twice weekly video conferences with head teachers, and these include Central South Consortium partners, and we're grateful to Councillor Smith for attending several of these as well. So it's very much this team agenda approach that's been effective throughout. The other thing that we've done is we've made sure that all groups have benefited from expert school representation. So school leaders are very much involved in all the decision making that we've put in place since March. A key purpose of this on the next slide, as Rachel's going through it, is stakeholder engagement. Initially, we had daily video conferences with all head teachers. That's now moved to twice weekly. Excuse me. Obviously, the voice of children and young people is important. We gather that through Bridgend School Youth Council and school councils. And also, we've engaged parents in June looking at taking their opinions on board, and we had over 11,000 responses to an online survey that shaped our responses to schools going forward from September. Obviously, as you would appreciate, we've liaised very closely with a number of external delivery partners, including Welsh Government and Central South Consortium, just to make sure that our plans are aligned with their expectations. We've also, as we're doing now, engaged with elected members, and also all of our approach has been governed consistently by senior leadership and cabinet member oversight. So going on to the key issues, and this is a good period for us to stop and sort of reflect on where we've been over the last 8-9 months. So there are a number of key issues that we have seen. So first of all, as you can imagine, social distancing has been a key one in school and childcare settings. We've had several transport issues, not least with using face masks and the provision of bespoke vehicles for learners. We've had a number of issues around catering, which I'll talk about shortly. Cleaning is obviously a very important facet of school life, and I'll talk you through some of the pragmatic solutions we've adopted there. And then finally, looking at hygiene and health and safety. So on the first slide, if Rachel can just flick that up, the first one is around social distancing. So as you can imagine, early doors when the pandemic started, there was significant work undertaken by schools and officers to make sure really that our childcare hubs and schools were safe environments. Now, these have been supported by robust risk assessments that have been supported by the Corporate Health and Safety team. So I can confirm now that all schools have comprehensive risk assessments in place. They've been undertaken, they're organic, because obviously they change over time, and we're very lucky that the Corporate Health and Safety team in Bridgend works very closely with schools to make sure that they are appropriate. We've also invested significantly in and around the school building, not least in markings and signage that we've provided to all schools to provide consistency across Bridgend. The other thing we've done in Bridgend, and again something I'm very proud of, is that we've worked very hard to make sure there's consistent and clear policy and guidance in place for all school leaders and for school staff. One of the challenges, which I'll talk about later on, is making sure that we do understand that some learners have particular challenges, and those with some additional learning needs need bespoke support. So in the next couple of slides, I'll talk about that as well with you. Thanks, Rachel. So moving on to the transport slide, as you can imagine, the use of face coverings is something that has taken a significant amount of officer time and working with Welsh Government to make sure this policy is deployed effectively. It's not just the policy and the practice, but it's also the cost, because clearly there is a cost to providing these. At the start of the school term, we provided 60,000 to schools. And again, we are seeing some schools now where we're looking to replenish that supply. We've also had to provide additional support for those learners with additional learning needs. And again, this has been costly, not just the start of the school day, but during the school day as well. You'll be aware that a lot of schools operate staggered start and finish times. So they open at different times and close at different times in the afternoon. And of course, this has been difficult to coordinate the transport arrangements for those schools. Of course, not all schools have significant transport requirements, but those that do have placed the burden on the local authority team to make sure they coordinate this effectively. And finally, on this particular slide is some of the issues we've faced when trying to transport pupils home following notification of a positive case in school, because obviously there are a number of self-isolation requirements then to make sure that pupils are transported home effectively. Next slide, please, Rich. So the next one is around school catering. Now, obviously, we've made sure that all pupils within our schools are receiving appropriate food. As you'll no doubt appreciate, we've got a fantastic catering service, and they've worked incredibly hard since March to make sure that all learners in schools are fed and fed well. A couple of challenges from a practical point of view. The social distancing issues are obviously prevalent within school canteens and within school halls. So we've had to make sure that we've got guidance in place for catering service staff. And also we've had the challenge of providing free school meals to now almost 5,400 learners who've required free school meals delivered via food parcels to their home addresses. There's also the challenge within Bridgend, as with most local authorities, and not all schools sign up to the local authority's catering service. So obviously we've needed to work with a number of commercial suppliers just to ensure that all learners have had appropriate food. Okay, next slide please, Reg. As all members can appreciate, cleaning has been a pivotal issue within all our schools, and we've developed deep enhanced cleaning protocols across the board. And again, there are protocols in place if, for example, there are spillage, if children are ill in school, and obviously the cleaning protocols are adopted universally. We've also adopted a number of consistent operational routines just to make sure that toilets, desks and chairs are cleaned appropriately across our schools. And this has been a mammoth undertaking. It's been done very much with the support of schools, but it's been certainly challenging. We've had to make some additional resources available to support school cleaning. It's not just about the cost, it's the availability, certainly in the early phases of the pandemic, making sure that we had appropriate equipment and appropriate resources available. So that was most definitely a challenge. And as with catering, as you can see, not all schools have the cleaning provided by corporate services. They're provided by externals. So clearly we've needed to work with them to make sure that their plans are consistent and they meet with our expectations. And finally, with many other things, the cost of cleaning, obviously that's gone up, and we've had to manage that within quite a tight budget. Moving on to hygiene then, Rich, please. This has been a very important part of what we've done in schools, and a part of it has been a consistent messaging to learners, especially young learners, making sure that hands are washed appropriately, that hand sanitizer is used where required. And this has been something that we've consistently reiterated the message, not just in school, but out to school as well, just to make sure this policy and practice continues 24/7. One of the initial issues, as with some of the cleaning products, was the availability of hand sanitizer. We managed to get sufficient hand sanitizer in for all our schools, but obviously there's an ongoing cost, and this is something that we're currently working with Welsh Government on to provide additional funding for. And simply around social distancing requirements, making sure that not like this 6-inch social distance in this picture, we try to make sure that there is social distancing wherever possible. And then the last slide on the key issues one is one to do with safety. I'll start off talking about PPE, personal protective equipment. Clearly, right at the very beginning, it was challenging getting some PPE into school. The availability just simply wasn't there. We've managed to get that now, working closely with suppliers. So face coverings are available and have been issued to schools. As you can appreciate, that the policy has shifted a number of times since March, but obviously we are consistent with Welsh Government practice on that. But again, the costs going forward, they are expensive, and to maintain this in the future is going to be a challenge. One of the issues is around sustainability as well, and we're working very closely with the Communities Directorate on this particular area. We've adopted reusable masks to reduce the amount of waste. But again, they don't last forever. So one of the challenges we've had is just to make sure that we can replenish the stock, but again, not add into the burden of waste from the local authority. From a teaching and learning point of view, obviously having a mask over a teacher's face, that is some impediment to communication within the classroom. So again, that's something we're working with schools on at the moment to try and look at different ways of providing PPE to make sure that communication is accessed more effectively by teachers and learners. And finally, this is a key issue for us, making sure, as we said with personal hygiene, it's not just about in school, it's about re-emphasising this method and message all the time outside school to make sure that it's been adopted across all our schools in Bridgend. Okay, thanks, Rick. Next slide. So just to give you an update on where we are with the current position, as of Friday, there were 24 schools, so around about 40% of our schools were affected by positive coronavirus tests. Last week in Bridgend, 50 pupils and 28 staff across our schools tested positive. Now, the impact is quite significant on this because it means that almost 2,200 learners and around 120 staff from our schools are currently self-isolating. So as of last Friday, 10% of our school population of children and pupils were self-isolating. So it is significant. Now, as you'll appreciate, for a lot of you are governors or parents, you will have seen a letter from me on Friday. We are aiming to keep schools open until the 18th of December, but I think it's fair to say that it is a challenging situation. The vast majority of communication we receive from parents very much is in favour of keeping schools open. But again, it's not universally popular, and many parents we've seen already have notified us that they won't be sending their children in the last week of term. So again, it's maintaining this correct balance of blended learning is very important. Okay, last couple of slides then. Rich, next one. We've spoken to the team really, and what I've tried to do is to try and give you an update on where we feel the particular increases in public demand for some of our services. So first of all, as you can imagine, there's been quite a significant strain on early help, so family support in the main, and mainly relating to emotional wellbeing support, and we'll pick that up with you later. Now, similarly, we've seen an uptake in support across all age ranges for mental health and wellbeing support, and obviously we're working with schools along with our school-based counsellors on this. There's been a fairly significant increase in pupils eligible for free school meals, and now almost 5,400, so that's almost up 10% since the start of the pandemic. One thing that is interesting is we've seen a reduction in demand for free breakfast provision. In total across Bridie, only about a quarter of our schools are now offering this because the demand simply isn't there. So in linked with the risk of running these provisions, we're not seeing parents in the main sending learners to schools. We've also seen, and this has probably impacted on your inboxes, there's been a significant number of in-year school transfer admission applications for parents that basically have waited until children be back in school, and there's been a relaxation of some of the lockdown procedures before they've moved home. Now, this has placed a significant strain on a very small school admission team. We're doing our best, but obviously it is challenging. And lastly, on this slide, is we are looking for more. We're looking at more demand from parents for schools to deliver live or synchronous online learning for their children. And as per Welsh Government, this is a school-based decision, and it's for schools to decide whether or not this would be appropriate. Okay, next slide, please, Reg. Okay, coming to the end now. So I thought I'd pull together some of the main challenges. So first of all, as you can see the draw on public services in the previous slide, there is a demand for additional emotional and physical well-being support for children, for staff, for parents and carers. And I think the key bit there is not just about school-based staff, but also for the 1,500 local authority staff who are supporting schools at the moment. Most of those 1,500 are school-based, so they would be catering or cleaning staff. But again, the educational psychologists and other people, obviously we are supporting schools over the last couple of months, and it's been a strain on them too. We are seeing recently parental engagement is challenging. Again, we are having different opinions expressed by parents. As I mentioned earlier, some parents want schools to continue open, some parents don't, and it's dealing with some of the aspects of working with parents on those challenging issues. Availability of school staff is one that we've had a particular issue with recently, and especially when we see some schools within their school senior leadership team. And what I mean by that is the head, the deputy and the assistant heads in secondary schools all being off, all self-isolating. So obviously then we need to make a decision on whether or not schools can continue to operate effectively without that management in place. I mentioned two words here, blended and hybrid. You will be aware of what I mean by blended. So that's when we have a combination of online and physical learning. But hybrid learning is one that's becoming increasingly difficult. And I know we've got a few teachers online at the moment who will certainly relate to this. What I mean by hybrid learning is when we have half a class or half a year group that are needing to self-isolate, and half a class and half a year group who are in school. And that's difficult for a school to manage, because obviously they need to run the physical lessons and the online lessons often concurrently or after school hours. So that's a real challenge for workload, and also a challenge to make sure that the quality of learning is effective. You'll no doubt be aware of some of the examination issues that we faced in the summer, and going forward now working with Qualifications Wales for next year around centre assessed grades and the moderation of learner grades. Again, challenging, and we're currently working with Welsh Government on this to alleviate any concerns for students and their families for next year. I mentioned previously about managing some of the requirements of children with complex or additional learning needs, not just transport, but obviously in school. This is challenging in this moment in time, and we're deploying additional resource then to special schools in particular to support their learners. Business support, I've mentioned catering and school transport, but some of these ancillary services are really challenging. They are stretched. And what we're seeing is we're not sure on how it's going to look in the future. So again, it's difficult to ascertain some of these future pressures. And finally then, as you no doubt appreciate, around cost pressures, there are a number of COVID-19 related costs which I've alluded to in this presentation, but also the normal budgetary challenges that we are facing. They haven't gone away, so we're still dealing with them. We are getting significant support from Welsh Government as far as finance is concerned, but it is difficult. And obviously there's something from a scrutiny point of view. We are keen to report to you all the work that we're doing to make sure that ultimately we have a balanced budget and our learners and their families receive the best possible support. So if you can stop presenting now, Rich, and if you can hand back to the chair, I'd welcome any comments or questions.
Brilliant. Thanks for that presentation, Lynsey, and I think it's a really good overview of the challenges and issues that you and your team have faced. So I want to thank you and your team for all the hard work during the last, 9 months. Is that all it's been? This pandemic feels like it's been going on forever. Right, our first question is from Amanda Williams, please.
Hi, apologies first of all for the croaky voice. I'm going to keep my camera off because I don't want to scare you all because I'm full up at the moment of a cold. I've got 3 questions if that's okay. One is based on my experiences as a parent with children in school, and the other 2 as a governor of 2 schools. The first one is that the signs and symptoms of COVID in children is different to the standard 3. I've been speaking to the school nurse at Bridie who said that a lot of the children are presenting with sore throats and headaches first before one of the 3 main symptoms. And I've got this from experience because I was called to pick up my 11-year-old son 2 weeks ago who had a terrible sore throat and headache, and I had to bring him home. Overnight, he became quite unwell and presented with COVID symptoms, and so we had to then have him tested. It'd been the same for 3 other children in his class, who also, fortunately my son, his first test came back inconclusive, the second test was negative, but 3 of the children in his class came back as positive. So I think the children are going into school with headaches and sore throats and quite often have COVID, but because schools can only send children home if they've got one of the 3 classic symptoms, I think it's running through the schools a lot easier than it could be. So the first question is, what can we do to look at this? Because I know we're relying on the scientists at the moment and the 3 specific symptoms of a high temperature, a cough, or loss of taste and smell. So that's my first question. Do you want me to then read off the other 2 questions or wait for that one?
I'm quite happy through you, Chair, to take 3.
Yeah, fine.
Right, okay. My second question is with regards to teacher wellbeing, and I've got significant concerns regarding teacher wellbeing. Because at the moment, I think a lot of teachers are frightened to go anywhere. We're leading up to Christmas. They're frightened to go to the shops, to do their Christmas shopping, to do anything else, because they're terrified of bringing something into school, resulting in all the staff having to self-isolate over Christmas. So my second question is, what are we doing to look at teacher wellbeing at the moment, because I think everyone is terrified at the moment of what they're going to do. And then the third question is through my role as a governor, is how you're managing non-contact time for head teachers over Christmas. If it's rotated amongst the senior leadership team, then it can only be staffed by those on the leadership scale. So again, looking at staff wellbeing, as some schools, that there will be reliance only on a small number of staff in those schools. So those are my 3 questions. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Williams. Thanks, Chair. Am I okay to respond?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Thanks, Chair. So, Councillor Williams, first of all, thank you for the 3 questions. The signs and symptoms one is a really interesting one, and it's a very difficult challenge for schools. Clearly, we're adopting a safety first procedure, but as you quite rightly say, the policy that we've had in place is that unless those 3 symptoms or 4 symptoms are present, there is no reason for the child not to attend school. Now, the point that you've raised there is a very important one. It's been raised by other parents as well. If we see some of these issues, do schools send those children home? It's interesting that some schools have done it and they've adopted a very safety first approach, and the children have been sent home. And we face some criticism then from parents for doing so. So I don't think it's one you can win on. It's very, very difficult. But what schools are certainly doing, they're making sure that all precautions are taken before learners come in. The other challenge we've got is the delay in symptoms appearing. So we're seeing some children coming into school that are asymptomatic, but then later display symptoms. Well, of course, that becomes challenging then from a contact and TTP point of view. But there's no perfect answer to it. It is very difficult. The second one, the first thing I want to recognise is the tremendous effort of staff, school-based and local authority staff since March. It's been a phenomenal effort all round. So teacher wellbeing and local authority officer wellbeing is absolutely paramount. We have tried a number of things to support this. In my presentation, I alluded to the teacher wellbeing group. That's been well received, actually, and last week we had a professional development workshop where we invited in an external provider for occupational help, and they've been supporting schools throughout that. So there's a number of mechanisms we've put in place, not least around reducing out of school contact, for example, parents' evenings. We take that down to the statutory minimum, and also within school, reducing the number of extracurricular activities that would affect schools. We've also put in place a range of policies that will make sure that schools are not unduly challenged over the period, and the improvement partners, many of the challenge advisors have moved very much into a pastoral role rather than in a challenge role as they would have been previously. The last point around the non-contact time over Christmas, this is obviously one that we're working through at the moment. It's a good question. It comes on the back of a meeting I had with all heads last week. We've agreed a common protocol with them and TTP for support over Christmas. So what we're doing over the Christmas break is that we're one of 3 local authorities, I understand, across Wales that are doing this, is that head teachers will not be contacted directly by TTP over Christmas. We've identified a small officer team. I'm sure members would be delighted to know that I'm on call on Christmas Day. So the TTP will be coming through me and my senior team. So head teachers won't be required to check their emails all the time. They will come to officers. Officers will do the check-in for them. And then we will contact heads only when absolutely necessary on the mobile phone. So obviously that takes a considerable weight off head teachers' mind. But obviously on the flip side, places it on local authority officers. Nick and her team as well, I see Nick is online. She's done a tremendous piece of work last week working with TTP colleagues to limit any contact after the 18th of December with schools. So again, these single points of contact that are in place from local authority officers will help, and also that limiting contact will make a considerable difference. And I don't know if you want to come in there, Nick, through the chair, but just to explain, that sort of procedure we've put in place to really limit possible contact.
Yeah, do you want to come in?
Yeah, happy to. And on the first point, Councillor Williams, I'd be very happy to take that point you've made to my weekly meeting I have with Public Health Wales and TTP, which is tomorrow. We've tried throughout the pandemic to work very much as a Cwmtaf Morgannwg team and to have similar processes and protocols between ourselves, RCT and Merthyr. So that weekly meeting will help me have a discussion about whether other areas are seeing something similar. So I will take that tomorrow. But basically, we've had an open dialogue, in fairness, with TTP, Public Health Wales and Shared Regulatory Services throughout this pandemic. What we've tried to do throughout is identify processes that make this as easy for head teachers as possible. So what happens at the moment is obviously head teachers are the only people, or senior leaders within schools are the only people who can identify contact groups for TTP, because particularly in the older age groups, when children go into option groups, no one else would necessarily have that information about who is a close contact. So what we've done is we've introduced a very brief initial assessment that someone in the school completes. They're then contacted by a health and safety officer from our corporate health and safety unit, who then offer support, guidance and information to the school on any case that they've got. So we've tried throughout to try and relieve the burden. We've been running a contact rota between the senior management team since the beginning of this. So every weekend, a senior member of my team is on duty, and head teachers ring us and do ring us whenever they need to throughout the weekend period. And we offer support. Lots of interesting and unique situations have arisen that we've, I think, found very helpful to have a dialogue about. It's not as if every situation we've seen before, even though we're quite well into this now and we've had lots and lots of incidents, unfortunately, in our schools, we're still getting unusual circumstance being thrown up, queries around isolation dates and things like that. And I think head teacher colleagues and senior leader colleagues have found it really helpful to have someone to have that dialogue with, and that's a member of the senior management team. Thank you.
Brilliant. Do you want to come back at all, Amanda? Are you happy with that?
No, that's fine. I'm just concerned that the numbers are rising with regards to the children who are coming off now because of the first question I raised. I had a text late last night. Another of my sons is off homeschooling this week. He's only had, it'll mean he's now got to isolate until they break up, which means he'll have had 4 weeks, of this whole term in school because of the cases. So I think the figures might have been going up again this week because a number of different classes were contacted again over the weekend. But thanks.
Okay. Councillor Sedgebeer then is next.
Thanks, Chair. And first, I just want to check that Lynsey's all right because that cough didn't sound good. But I'm glad we're meeting virtually. That's all I'm going to say. But I hope it's just the fact that you were talking too much rather than anything else. But so I've got 3 points I wanted to raise. The first one, and this isn't a criticism of the department because I think what you've done is incredible. And I can't sort of thank you, the staff, the school teachers enough, but I am just slightly concerned of the lateness of this item coming to this scrutiny. So it's more of a question for us as a committee rather than you as the department, because you've been doing an amazing job. We've had the emails throughout the pandemic and everything like that. So it's not about you not bringing this to us. I've just got a question probably more for Tom as the chair about why this hasn't been brought to us previously, because in your presentation, Lynsey, you were talking about stuff that was happening in March, and the changes that has happened, just over this brief time have been immense. So it's more for us as a committee maybe to reflect on that and to reflect on how we move forward. This is, even with the great news about the vaccines and so on, this is going to be with us for a long time. And if, God forbid this ever happens again, we need to be more reactive to it. And actually, we as like a committee, a council, need to work out how we're going to have better, not necessarily scrutiny, because I don't think anyone would disagree with what you've done as a department, but just that a little bit more in-depth that you've given us today would have been useful, like in September when they were all going back sort of properly, maybe in the last 2 weeks of July when the schools came, just that sort of thing. But like I said, that's not really a question for you, Lynsey. It's more of a question for maybe Tom as the chair or the Democratic Services Department. So my 2 questions really for you, Lynsey, or the department is, what are we doing about the attainment gap? Because I am concerned that with all these long periods of time that children have been off, lots of them are falling behind in big gaps to what we are normally used to. There was a report, I can't even remember when it was, but about children coming back to school not being potty trained, losing the ability to use knives and forks and basic things like that. So there's that element, and then there's also the attainment of kids just not being at the place where they should be in their schooling. And I'm just wondering, what are we looking to do moving forward to try and close that gap as soon as possible? And then the second question is about post-COVID, whether that actually happens or not, but what are we going to do in terms of, I think that we should have more of an emphasis on things like hand washing, sanitizing and so on in our schools, in our lives more generally, because the more we do that, the more we can cut down on things like coughs, colds, flus. And wondering how we can take the things that we've learned from COVID that have actually probably been a good thing to move forward and make sure that they sort of stay in place afterwards.
Thanks. Can I answer first, Lynsey, and then I'll bring you in for the other 2. So I may need scrutiny officers to help me a bit here with the dates, but if you remember back in answer to your question, Bridie, back in September, I'm pretty sure it was, I met with the scrutiny officers and with Lynsey to kind of arrange a kind of informal briefing on the return to schools, because I felt like it was important and that we should consider it as a committee. Now, I would have preferred to have had that done in a kind of more formal format, like today, but I just think that like where we were at the time, that probably wasn't possible. So yeah, that's, you know, it's not ideal, but we still had that meeting in September to consider some of those things, and I know members then could have the opportunity to ask Lynsey anything that they wanted. In terms of the timing for today's meeting, I may have to defer to Tracy or Rachel on that one, just to explain.
It was more the fact, Tom, that we had a meeting in. I'm digressing from Lynsey's report, but we had a meeting in, what was it, October, which felt like a bit of a waste of time. Where, you know, these sort of issues could have been brought up, but that's
No,
my opinion.
I understand that, and I don't disagree with it either. I just think where we were when we had that meeting, we couldn't have the function to have the full scrutiny committee like I would have preferred. So from my perspective, it was like, well, it was that or nothing. So I would rather have what we did have informally. So yeah, there it is. Okay, Lynsey, do you want to answer the other 2 points?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Sedgebeer. And first of all, thank you for the concern for my well-being, and also for the kind words for my staff, because they have worked incredibly hard. So your second question relates to the attainment gap, and this is an extremely important one for us, because obviously that's what we're about as an Education and Family Support Directorate. Interestingly, I met with Estin last week, and there's a very clear focus now from being in the summer term, where it was very much on the emotional well-being and reintroduction of pupils into school. There's a very clear focus now on what are we doing about the teaching and learning, what are we doing about outcomes for learners, and obviously relating to some of the issues that I flagged up earlier in the presentation around examinations next summer. So one of the things we've done, and this is a very recent thing, we've just had £150,000 from Welsh Government via the Regional Consortia School Improvement Grant. And we're working with schools and their clusters, very much focusing on this, along with the Cllr funding we've had from Welsh Government to support better teaching and more evidence of teaching in schools. And as you will appreciate, our focus is very much on our 4 areas of our post-inspection action plan. One of those is around schools causing concern, and also around schools literacy. So there's a very clear focus on that. I'm sure you'll appreciate, all members, that literacy and numeracy are gateway elements of the curriculum, and we're trying to support schools and learners through that. So we're hoping that funding will certainly kickstart some of the activity in schools around it. Schools have done a fantastic job, I've got to say, with their blended learning. As you can imagine, back in March, blended learning was still pretty immature. Over the last 9 months, it has certainly come on leaps and bounds. And when you see some of the activities now that are being produced on a blended learning basis in schools, they're remarkable. And we've had lots of parents say that to us. On the last one, this is a dreadful virus, and we've dealt with so many very difficult situations over the last 9 months, and obviously there are a number of lessons learned as you allude to, Councillor Sedgebeer. So you mentioned around hand washing, but also, as I mentioned earlier, around blended learning. This has certainly enabled us to conduct some really interesting and really worthwhile activities around remote learning for learners. So you're right. I think we've got to have a number of lessons learned from this and build on this, and some of the positives that come out of this awful time. We are certainly doing that. One of the things that we have done, and we will certainly be bringing a report back to members on this, over the last 9 months, we've kept a catalogue and a decision and action log of all the things that we've done. And what we're constantly doing is testing these and disseminating the good practice to schools. I think it's fair to say that many schools are adopting lots of the good practice, and even after COVID, we can't see us reverting to some of the practices before March, because there's some really good things that have come out of it. So you're right, lessons learned, and I think it's the same across the board. We are still learning, and there are still emerging issues that are testing us, as Nick said.
Do you want to come back, Bridie, at all?
Not really. Thank you, Lynsey. It was just the fact that I just want to say I take my hat off to all of you in a completely different role. I'm a guide leader, and I do a virtual guides and brownie session once a week, and that is stressful enough. So to all the teachers, to all every member of staff that is doing their bit, like, I take my hats off to you, because it's been such a difficult time, and you're doing amazing. So yes, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Blundell then is next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I'd like to echo Councillor Sedgebeer's points there about the staff, teachers, and the Lynsey's department here at BCPC. I think they've done fabulous work, and please take the thanks to this committee back, Lynsey, because they truly deserve it. I've got 3 questions, if you'd allow me, Chair. First one is, you've talked about budgetary pressures for the department and for schools. Are we still going to see a budgetary pressure of children needing equipment like laptops, Wi-Fi, and so that? Is that going to be an ongoing pressure? Because have we budgeted for the future of that? My second one is, we've learned a lot over the last 9 months of what councils and governments can do if they really put their mind to it. So many experts believe COVID-19 won't be the only pandemic we ever have, and going forward there will be more, as there have been those in the past. Are we more prepared now for a future pandemic than we were last year? And also, you may have mentioned it in your presentation. I sort of got lost in losing the presentation at parts, but there's obviously going to be no exams next summer. So how are we preparing to evaluate, although that's not a very nice word, evaluate our children and how they're doing in school? Thank you.
Okay, Lynsey.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Brundell. So first of all, as I said to Councillor Sedgebeer, your kind words are very much appreciated, and I will certainly, and Nick will feed them back to the department, so thank you. So first of all, around the budgetary pressures, and I'll focus on the particular issue you've alluded to there around the availability of hardware and software and additional kit for those that we determine to be digitally excluded. So right at the beginning of the pandemic, Welsh Government set up a digital exclusion fund, which enabled several hundred learners in Bridgend to have access to laptops and to portable Wi-Fi devices, so allowed learners who don't have broadband in the house the same speed of connection that other learners might have. So again, we're very pleased to do this, and I think to date we've deployed around 600 devices around this. And we've also gone out to schools. We went out to schools into September to make sure that schools have appropriate kit in place. Now, because of the Welsh Government Hub Infrastructure Grant and because of the Digital Exclusion Grant, that's certainly been in a much better position than we were in March. So again, from what schools have told us, there isn't a need for significantly additional funding because most of that has been covered. But again, it is an important question because obviously if learners don't have the kit and they don't have connectivity, they can't learn at home. So obviously that was a key issue. The next one, from a preparedness point of view, absolutely. All schools in Bridgend now have robust risk assessments in place. We certainly didn't have those back in March, or certainly not to the extent or comprehensive nature as we are now. But also one of the things that we've introduced since September, and we're really pleased about this, and it's been shared with other local authorities actually, all schools now in Bridgend have business resilience plans in place. So, for example, I'm no epidemiology expert, but what I can tell you is if an adverse event like this occurred in future, we are certainly better prepared. And now we have business continuity in plans in place to make sure that if an eventuality, like, for example, learners not being in school occurs, we're much better prepared than we were in March. And finally, this is an ongoing one. I think where I'm very lucky in Bridgend, I've had a lot of support on this one with the Cabinet member, Councillor Smith, on this. We've actually met with WJEC and with Qualification Wales representing Bridgend on this matter. And clearly what we're trying to do is to make sure that we understand the process early and we feed this back to parents, families and Bridgend schools. Clearly, last summer was challenging. We want to avoid some of the issues that we encountered last year, but certainly from the early feedback we've had from Qualifications Wales and WJEC, the centre assessed grades facility and moderation capability of the system is in a much better place. And also I think that they've really listened to the profession as well and listened to students and their families in putting in place a more robust system for next year.
Okay, do you want to come back, Councillor Blundell?
No, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Lynsey, for those answers.
Next up then is Councillor Stuart Baldwin.
Thank you, Chair. Lynsey, first of all, as the chair of the COVID recovery panel, I'd be really, would really welcome you being able to come to that panel in relation to the learning from COVID, what has changed, what needs to continue to change, and what don't we want to go back to, because obviously that's the remit of that panel as well. So really look forward to seeing that. My question is around ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, and we all know that the impact of the adverse childhood experiences have on children. What are we doing to move to recognise COVID-19 as an adverse childhood experience, so that the generation that has suffered during this pandemic isn't put to the sidelines in relation to other adverse childhood experiences? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor. First of all, more than happy to attend the COVID recovery panel. I'd be delighted to do so. So let me know, and I'll obviously prioritise that. That's not a problem. Secondly, before I bring Nick in, because Nick deals a lot with the integrated working and family support side of things, where we are very lucky in this directorate, and this is certainly recognised by Estin, is our early help and family support services are part of the education directorate. So of course we've got great synergy between our childcare providers, between our childcare support, and also those edge of care facilities that so often are so pivotal in people's lives. So again, we've got a very close working relationship, not just with internal partners, but around third sector, health and social care here. So a very close, obviously, relationship between us and other providers. Nick, I'll bring you in now to talk about some of the work we do with ACEs, and then I'll come back with, if that's okay, Chair, after Nick's contribution. Nick?
Yeah, I think, just to echo Lynsey's point there, I think we're almost unique actually in Wales in having early help within an education directorate, which means that those children whose needs are over the universal but have never and will never reach a threshold for a social services type intervention can be picked up at the earliest possible opportunity through our education contact with those children. What we have seen within COVID, obviously, is increased pressure around well-being, low-level mental health needs, anxiety, things like that. We have had some additional funds, and we have been able to increase our resources. So we've got well-being support workers now attached to each of our primary schools. We had them attached to secondary, but we now have them attached to primary. We've had some increase in our funding around school-based counselling, so there's a bit more capacity in that system. We have seen an increase into referrals into our early help system. We did expect that, obviously, once schools went back and there was more contact with children. We did anticipate an increase, but there has been a significant increase, and we're looking to see how we can repurpose some of our services and focus them slightly differently to make sure that we monitor the impact of that. We do lots of work around parenting. We're looking at how we develop our parenting resources to try and make sure that parents are fully equipped to deal with some of the quite unique issues that are being thrown up by COVID. And, we're all dealing with something we've never dealt with before. So clearly we're having to adapt, as we have done since March, on the hoof, really. I think where it links to the sort of ACE agenda is obviously in many ways, because ACEs can be lots of things. Lots of them are around mental health, which COVID has clearly identified for some children. A lot of it is around ill health, and we will have children who experience ill health themselves, or significant ill health or bereavement within their family, which clearly are ACEs. So we've worked, as you know, very hard on the ACE agenda. We were the pilot area for ACEs, so our work regarding that linkage to early childhood experiences and the detriment children feel in later life is very well developed here in Bridgend. And I think what this pandemic has done is really evidence how important it is that our early help offer is so unique here and based in schools. So we are seeing those children at the very earliest opportunities.
Okay. Do you want to come back, Stuart?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Nicola and Lynsey. I think it's really important, and I hope that it's fully understood the impact of this is generational. I probably would have experienced some levels of adverse childhood experience, but not to the extent that this current schooling years have done, and I just, you know, we don't fully understand the full impact that's going to be on these children yet because of being out of school for so long. We've heard about people forgetting how to use, you know, if you don't write for a certain period of time, holding a pen and writing is difficult. These are children that are not doing things on a regular basis, and I just would hate and I'm glad that we have a more unique approach than other areas. So again, that's fantastic news. It's just so that it is on the radar, and that we are not forgetting that, as well as depression or bereavement, but this is a societal impact on these children, and so they will have failed to have the same exposure to meeting in groups and being able to converse face to face and, you know, build those friendships and relationships. Those are just as much of an adverse effect as alcohol, substance misuse, bereavement and everything else. As long as we are considering that, that's it. Thank you very much, Chair, for allowing me to come back on such an extended time.
No problem. Councillor Jane Gebby then is next.
Thank you, Chair. And rather than infuse about our education support staff again, I'll echo the comments previously made. I do have a couple of questions. I do appreciate that you may not be able to answer some of them, Lynsey. We've had lots of discussions about the devices that we've been giving to people that don't have access to facilities at home. How many of those devices are now shared? Because that would have an impact on the household of children. You know, if it's being shared between 3 kids at home, the reality is that's limiting their access to any sort of blended learning. The other thing I'd like to ask is about the educational psych involvement, specifically around the ALM bill, because that was already going to cause massive problems with us in schools. What's the impact it's having now, and how many educational assessments are we not doing, or how many are we doing? Because I appreciate the paperwork for that is extensive. So for each individual one, and do we have the capacity? We're also not keeping attendance figures for schools, are we, Lynsey? Because we don't have to give them to Welsh Government at the minute. I appreciate that we might not have to give them to Welsh Government, but I would expect us to be keeping them so we can see actually how many children are attending school and when they are. And there's also something to be said about the position of head teachers and teaching support staff at the minute. I've got a meeting this afternoon with the educational trade unions, and it's about the position of schools remaining open, and it's up to each individual local authority, and certain schools are now closing early, and actually what is the capacity, because we have so many teachers and school support staff going off. Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, Lynsey, do you want to come back on those? You're on mute. You're on mute.
Someone has got to do it in a meeting, Chair, haven't they? So it's me today. So apologies. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Gebby. So I'll just run through the questions. First of all, it's an interesting point around the sharing the devices. That is an issue. And it's not just the issue about siblings sharing devices. What we found is as more and more parents have worked from home, there's also the parents sharing devices as well. Now, it doesn't just impact on the device sharing, but also if there's not robust connectivity within the household, there's a contention ratio there if so many devices are accessing the internet at one time. So again, what we've tried to do to alleviate that is where schools have come to us and they've asked for additional resources. I'm not aware of any situation where we haven't provided it. And what we've also done is some schools have donated legacy kit to other schools. It's come into the local authority, we've repackaged it, put a new operating system on it and sent it out. And if there are issues around contention ratios, and what we mean by that is slower internet within family households, is that we'll issue MiFi devices. So again, that will allow learners to have better connectivity. But it is an issue and we are live to it. Secondly, you're absolutely right to flag up about the ALN reform bill. This is something that's taken a fair bit of time across Wales at the moment. When you look at the principles of the bill, it's difficult to argue with them. I think it's good news for children and young people, but there is significantly more demand on local authorities to put those principles in place. Currently, the EdPsychs, the Educational Psychologist Service, are obviously involved in this. I don't think it's having a particularly detrimental effect on their workload as far as individual assessments are concerned, but Councillor Gebby is absolutely right in the fact that over the last couple of months due to the difficulties around face-to-face contact and with some of the challenges about getting other professionals involved, these have been slowed down. So Councillor Gebby is absolutely right there, and it's something that we're certainly working with our inclusion service on. Interestingly, what we have done recently, we've restructured the directorate, not actually in light of COVID, because the restructure was in play before March, but certainly the new structure is focused very much on a particular support mechanism being in place for learners with additional learning needs. So we're hoping that will mitigate any risk of slippage further. Attendance figures, we collect the attendance figures slightly differently. Again, Councillor Gebby is correct there. We do have figures, interestingly, I'm quite happy with your permission, Chair, to share these with the committee. There's a couple of key figures really that we've tracked and we're particularly interested in, especially from an education welfare service point of view. We've noticed around 50 learners have since September become electively home educated. Now, clearly that's something that we need to support families on, just to make sure that they have appropriate guidance. And also, we're also tracking a number of learners that are up to 10% or more away from schools since September. And there's some 280 learners that we are tracking and supporting families on to make sure that if parents decide not to send them to schools, obviously from a safeguarding point of view, we are supporting those families. And from a school's point of view, we are making sure proper teaching and learning resources are being deployed. The last point, and again, this is a live issue, as I'm sure Councillor Gebby and other people will be absolutely aware of, is the issue around schools closing early. There's been significant discussions across Wales over the last couple of months, really, on the end of term arrangements. The decision by Welsh Government WLGA through local authorities is to keep schools open until the 18th. But, you know, as Councillor Gebby has said, and other people will be totally aware, there are going to be extenuating circumstances in certain schools. There is one Bridie school already that's closed for a couple of days this week because there's not sufficient staff in the school to maintain a healthy and safe working environment. So again, we will work with schools, and where a school, through their risk assessment and through consultation with a governing body and the local authority, would decide to close the school early, they would have my support.
Okay, do you want to come back at all, Jane?
No, thank you very much for your response, Lynsey. I would appreciate being kept up to date as well. And I know the leader is keeping us up to date with all the school closures, but, you know, in relation to the EdPsych and our learner demands, the only other additional question I would have for you is, because of those 50 learners that are now being home educated, and of those 10% of learners not attending school, what impact is that having on finances in school? Because that has a significant impact on budgets. And are we going to penalise schools this year for those specific areas?
Thanks, Councillor Gebby. The Chair, through you. Interestingly, we've been asked to pull together a report on EHE. So rather than preempt the report, what I'll make sure we do, we will make sure that we circulate a copy to all elected members. Nick, what's the timescale? I believe it's next week.
Yeah, it's been drafted, Lynsey. It'll be ready for next week.
Okay, if that's okay with you, Councillor Gebby, Councillor Chair, more than happy to do that.
Thank you very much, Lynsey. That's great.
Brilliant. Right, I know the Cabinet member then wants to come in next. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I'll just try and turn my camera on. Done it, I think. Yeah. If I may, Chair, perhaps I could just have a little bit of input from a Cabinet point of view to, I think, 3 themes that have cropped up this morning. First of all was Councillor Blundell's question about the next pandemic. Secondly, questions about blended learning, and thirdly, questions about exams. I have heard politicians on the telly calling this pandemic a 1-in-100-year event. I'm not an epidemiologist by any means, but I would have thought that's a bit complacent. You know, 100 years ago, we didn't have aeroplanes that could take you from Australia to Europe in 24 hours. So there's a huge potential now for transmission. And I think one thing we've done in this pandemic is we've learned how to cope. Back in March, we had no idea what to do. We had conflicting messages from central government. and messages from regional government, which were a bit less conflicted. And over the 9 months, we've seen many U-turns. We've been given a £10 voucher to go to Wetherspoons. And then we've been told if we go to Wetherspoons, there'll be no beer, and we'll have to be out of there by 6 p.m. anyway. So there's been huge sort of oscillations in policy. We've had to find our way through those conflicting messages. From the very start, what we did in Team Bridgend was we mobilised Team Bridgend, because Team Bridgend, I've said this before, so apologies if I'm repeating myself, Team Bridgend wasn't invented for the pandemic. Team Bridgend was in place long before, from the very minute, really, that Lynsey was appointed to his role, and the strength of that, I think, has shone through. But our principles in March were that any decision we make has got to be clear, it's got to be consistent, and it's got to be sustainable. So how do we define key workers, for example? Do we provide a place if there's one key worker in the family or two? Dozens and dozens of decisions have been made like that on a weekly and even on a daily basis for those 9 months. Free meals. Are we going to give vouchers? Are we going to give money? Are we going to deliver food parcels? We've had to make all those decisions. We've found out what works and what doesn't work, and I think we can log all those decisions away ready for the next emergency, whether it's a pandemic or whether it's some sort of environmental catastrophe. Who knows? Secondly, on blended learning, again, we preceded the pandemic by a realization that blended learning is a thing of the future. In university terms, it's a thing of the present, and I think schools, certainly secondary schools, have needed to catch up. But we had blended learning built into our sixth form proposals, if you remember. And now we realise that blended learning is here to stay. It will be part of the new normal. There are people kicking against it, saying that it's always best to have a teacher out the front and pupils sitting in rows, but that isn't the case. And we deliberately use the word blended learning, not distance learning, to indicate that we realise that you can't have 100% online learning in a school situation. There's got to be some face-to-face. But this will be with us permanently, and it's very important, as Lynsey has said, that we get the devices right and that we get Wi-Fi access everywhere. And thirdly, one of the most important things, I think, is the exams. And I think one thing we've learned there is that we do need to rebalance the whole exam system away from high stakes, end of course, cliff edge exams, much more towards formative assessment and the use of coursework and the use of teacher grades. And I'm not alone in saying this, because I can tell you that last March, the day that exams were cancelled, the 22 cabinet members across all political parties, incidentally, across Wales, we had a meeting and we immediately lobbied the minister to use teacher grades and not to trust the algorithm. I'm not a statistician, but I am an examiner, and I know that algorithms are used to moderate the marks and grades of whole big numbers of students, thousands of students are moderated through algorithms. What algorithms do is they make sure that the exams as a whole reflect previous results. What they can't do, and what this algorithm could never have done, is to be fair to individual students. The only way to be fair to individual students is to have some evidence of what students have actually achieved. And last summer, the only people with any evidence of what students had achieved were teachers. And I have to commend Kirsty Williams, not just for the way she's handled things over the whole 9 months, but for the fact that in due course, she stopped listening to certain advisors and started listening to others, and she scrapped the algorithm and went for teacher assessed grades, and that now has fed through to the arrangements that will happen for next summer. I happen to know the man who's chair of the committee which Kirsty has set up for the methodology for moderating teacher grades next summer, a fellow called Geraint Rees. I've worked with him very closely in the past, and I know that we're on the same wavelength. So I'm pretty sure we can avoid the fiasco we had last summer and have a much better system in the next summer. And again, this will become, I'm sure, part of the new normal. We will learn to trust exams a little bit less and trust teacher grades a little bit more.
Okay, thanks, Charles. And I think that's it for item 4. So can I just thank the invitees for coming along? And before you leave, Lynsey, obviously, I think from the committee, I think there was a clear recognition of the work that's been done both by yourself and your team of officers. And if you can just convey the thanks to this committee for all the hard work they've done, because it's very, very evident in everything you've said today.
Thanks, Chair. Certainly will do that, and it would be remiss of me not to thank you and other elected members the support officers have had as well. So thank you to all councillors. It's very much appreciated.
Thanks, Lynsey. Right then, item 5 then is the forward work programme update. So the committee's considered to request the recommendations of the cover report set out in paragraph 9.1 on page 10 of the agenda pack. I'll call on members who type speak into the instant messaging chat in the order that they indicate, and so I'll ask the scrutiny officers to present the report.
Hi Chair, it's Tracy. Just bear with me because I wasn't expecting to do this morning and Meryl was due to do it, so you'll just bear with me, okay? Okay, so item 5, the forward work programme update. So thank you, Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry to interject. I'm really, really sorry. I've just seen Councillor Beadle wanted to ask a question, but I didn't see it before wrapping up that previous item. Was it related to this item, Tom, or the previous one?
No, Chair, it was the previous one. It was the comment that I needed to sort of make at the end of the Q&A session.
I apologise. I didn't see it before I wrapped that up. I think Lynsey's left now. Apologies for that, Tom.
Yeah, well, we can't do anything about that, Chair. I mean, it is a challenge, but not. My question is about our challenges that we face. And it's not about what we do within the education system. And as a committee, our biggest challenge is the non-compliance of parents. Because, and we've also got an issue of a lack of information sharing between schools in a cluster. I'll give you an example of children being sent home in a secondary school to isolate, and where you got siblings of the same household that are still attending primary school and vice versa. It's a question of how we get this information around the cluster, because we can identify sibling groups, and we're able to manage better the rate of infection within our schools. And from my experience as a chair of government, I'm having issues of partygate, where people are deliberately having parties for their children, and we end up with more than one year group being sent home. But our biggest challenge is how we address these issues with the parents. But as I say, it's also about information sharing within the clusters, because here in my state, where we've actually got a secondary school, we got 6 primary schools feeding it. So we've got quite a big network of young people, especially with sibling groups that are in the primary and the secondary sector.
Okay. Can we, Tracy, would it be possible to get that sent to Lynsey in writing and share the response with the committee then, on the basis that Lynsey's no longer here?
Yes, Chair, I can do that.
Thank you. Councillor Gebby, quickly, do you want to come in and just say what you said in the chat, just on the record?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. I should have declared an interest as Chair of Mynydd Cymvig.
Okay, brilliant. Sorry, Tracy, back to you then on the forward work programme.
Okay, just bear with me a second. Okay, so as the Council has been advised that the local government financial settlement from Welsh Government will be later than expected, the scrutiny of the TFS medium-term financial strategy will be considered by the scrutiny committees after Cabinet considers the draft proposals on the 19th of January instead of this December cycle of meetings as originally planned. As set out in the table in paragraph 4.1 of the report, and following approval at November Council, the dates for scrutiny meetings have been moved to the 20th of January at 10 a.m. for the draft MTFS for the Education and Family Support and Communities Directorates, and then the 21st of January at 10 a.m. for the Social Services and Wellbeing and the Chief Executive's Directorates. In paragraph 4.5, the committees are reminded of the criteria form which members can use to propose further items for the forward work programme, which the committee can either consider for prioritisation at a future meeting. The criteria form emphasises the need to consider issues such as impact, risk performance, budget and community perception when identifying topics for investigation, and to ensure a strategic responsibility for scrutiny and maximises the opportunity for the impact. I'll hand back to you, Chair, for a discussion with members before we return to the recommendations in paragraph 9.
Okay, then we want to come in then on the forward work programme. We'll give it a minute. John Paul?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just going to say, really, there's not much really we can discuss about our forward work programme really at the moment, because we're not sure what the budget's going to be. So we're not sure where anything's going to be. So we're not. It's a very difficult situation we're in at the moment. So I think, and I do feel for the scrutiny officers, because I feel the day after the budget, we discuss the budget, we're going to have a lot more to talk about then, and we don't know what we're going to talk about at the moment. So I think it's very up in the air at the moment for us to put anything on our forward work programme, which is frustrating for us as well as chairs as well. But yeah, so I just wanted to say, I hope members have ideas already, but understand that it's going to be very tight at the end of January and February.
Yeah, I agree with that. And just in terms of themes from today's meeting, I wonder whether a kind of deep dive into hybrid learning might be a good idea, just based on questions and feedback from members, but I'll leave that open to you. Councillor Baldwin next.
Thank you, Chair. I noticed Tracy has highlighted, but I think it's probably best if we get the councillors out of the way first, and then Tracy can pick up on some of the other things. Having done the recent scrutiny training for chairs and attendees, I thought it was really useful that we make sure that we continue to look at the separation of the scrutiny groups and the BREP and the COVID panel. So while we are and have on our radar the MTFS cuts or savings, whichever you want to call them, I prefer cuts, to look at. I think I agree with something you've just said in relation to looking at deep dives in relation to particular issues. So I was going to ask around the whole thing of blended and hybrid learning, because the impact of the scrutiny groups that we were talking about was to look at specific sort of thorny issues rather than just looking at things that are nice to look at. And I get that MTFS isn't something nice to look at, but it is going to be extremely interrogated by BREP and by COSC as well. So I'd like to support your issue around the hybrid learning, and we could look at that and what has been, what are the potential opportunities for us to change things there.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, so perhaps that's one then to add to the next possible one that we can do. Martin, do you want to come in?
Yeah, good morning, Chair. Thanks very much. Yes, of course, budget is going to dominate scrutiny process for the next few weeks or so, but let's not take our eye off the ball for other areas that we have a responsibility for. It's been a long time since we've talked about safeguarding. There was a recent issue in Wales Online about a children's home that was subject to inspections. Surely we can deep dive into issues like that. And I can't remember actually when we actually did talk about safeguarding. So that's a recommendation from me, that we keep our eye on the ball on the welfare and well-being of those that are vulnerable. and children are particularly vulnerable. Schools are struggling with safeguarding at the moment. So that's my suggestion for committee anyway.
Well, I think, Tracy, we've got two good suggestions there for future topics before I hand back to you to take us through recommendations.
Yeah, that's fine, Chair. I've got that. Are you happy for me? Anybody else before I take you through the recommendations?
That's all the requests I've had. So if you just want to.
Okay, so in paragraph 9.1, the committee is recommended to note the next item for the draft interim forward work programme, which obviously is the MTFS items in December. We've identified further items for consideration on the forward work programme in the items we just had, and these are the main points of the report, Chair. Okay, so it's just those two. Thank you. Chair, you're on mute.
I knew right at the end. Okay, so A, we've noted that item, and B, we've got two further suggestions for topics to look at, which is hybrid learning and safeguarding. And yeah, as others have said, I kind of see the role of this committee as taking a deep dive on particular issues rather than, there are other committees that will look at the budget, not to say we won't. But budgets, we've got BREP and corporate scrutiny and everything else to look at that. I can see Councillor Sedgebeer is typing, so I'll just wait for her before we move on.
Can I just, sorry, Chair, quickly, going back to the previous item, I also just wanted to check whether there was anything that anybody wanted to bring up. Obviously, I made notes, we've got the minutes, but there was a couple of things that Lynsey said he'd do, but was there anything specific anybody else wanted at this stage? I'm pretty sure we've probably covered it, but before we disappear off.
Anyone? No. Okay. And I'm just checking you've got the note from Bridie in the chat. Yes, Tracy, about the meetings on the 20th and 21st.
Yes, I have. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah. Okay. Item 6 then is urgent items, and there are no urgent items of business in respect of which notice has been given in accordance with Part 4, Paragraph 4 of the Council Procedure Rules. Therefore, I want to thank everybody for coming along today and draw this meeting to a close.